From the European Parliament here in Brussels, this is Raw Politics. Thank you for joining us tonight, and this is what we have coming up on the program. Brexit on the brink. Theresa May defends a draft deal, negotiates a future one, and tries to save her own skin. Macron misstep. The French president stands by a plan to raise fuel taxes despite a deadly nationwide protest. Black Pete politics. Protests over a Dutch tradition some call racist. Rake America great. Why garden memes are exploding in Finland following some comments from the US president. And tradition or trolling. The annual APEC family photo that just won't die. All right, it's time to meet our panel this evening. We have Esther Zala. She's a reporter with the EU Observer focusing on Brexit and populism. Esther, which of these stories do you like?
I'll take Macron. I think it's really interesting to see how his domestic troubles and his international ambition create this tension, which is only going to get worse, it seems.
Indeed, it does seem indeed. All right, joining us as well is Shada Islam. She's a director of geopolitics at the Friends of Europe organization. Shada, which of these stories are you watching closely?
Black Pete. It's the clash between tradition and the novelty of living in a multicultural Europe.
I think it does make for an interesting debate as well. All right, and joining us also is Richard Corbett. He's a British Labour MEP and is with the group of Socialists and Democrats here at the Parliament. Which one of these stories are you keeping an eye on?
You won't be surprised to hear that it's Brexit, the chaos and confusion that reigns at the moment, which means all kinds of scenarios are possible.
All those scenarios that we will be looking at, and that is exactly where we will begin today. Because Theresa May, the British Prime Minister, she is not backing down. Speaking to business leaders in London today, the Prime Minister made it clear she will deliver her Brexit deal. Now, despite the continuing chaos coming from all sides in the UK over last week's withdrawal agreement, Mrs May doubled down on her efforts to sell it.
It was never going to be easy or straightforward, and the final stage was always going to be the toughest. But we have in view a deal that will work for the UK. And let no one be in any doubt, I am determined to deliver it. Thank you.
And as Theresa May fights for her political future back in the UK, the EU27 leaders in Brussels are pressing on. They met today to discuss the next document to be signed, the Declaration on the Future Relationship between the EU and the UK. The chief Brexit negotiator, Michel Barnier, updated journalists earlier.
The declaration will open the door to negotiations on an ambitious economic and strategic partnership in the future. Both the EU and the UK will have full control of their own legislation and rule-making. This is essential on our side for the integrity of the single market. It's essential for the UK in terms of taking back control. Now, more than ever, we must all remain calm, and I will remain calm, and keep our focus on the need for the UK to leave the EU in an orderly fashion.
Well, indeed, you were talking about chaos, Richard, in the UK. Michel Barnier is talking about the calm on this side of the channel. What do you make of the current situation now, looking at the reaction from both sides?
Well, as things stand, there's no chance of this deal getting a majority in the British Parliament. On the one hand, because it's turning out that Brexit bears no resemblance to what was promised by Leave campaigners, and public opinion is beginning to realise that. On the other hand, in Theresa May's own party, the hardline Brexiters want to be even more distant from the European Union than she is proposing.
So where are we with this future relationship? I mean, Esther, you've been looking at this closely. What is that future relationship looking like at this point?
Well, first of all, we do have to get a withdrawal agreement, because otherwise there won't be a future relationship, because there will be a disorderly withdrawal. What ministers were discussing today is whether to extend the transition period until 2022, which would go beyond the next general elections in the UK, which May has said it's already out of the question. But on the other hand, it would give the UK more time to negotiate a future relationship, a trade deal. So again, we get into an issue where the UK and the EU does not agree on the basics.
But Mrs. May said that she does not want to extend, in fact, that date. Like, she's going to stick with it. Do you think that is an unrealistic thing to say?
I think it's unrealistic. I think there is pressure from within her party, from the soft Brexiteers, if you like, to try and extend it and get a proper deal. Get something really also on freedom of movement between citizens, British and European. So I think there will be. I mean, that's the sensible way to go, right? That's what rational people would do. If you are going to have a Brexit, do it decently, give yourself more time to negotiate. But I'm not sure, as Richard
Why do you think
said,
she's so adamant not to extend that transition period?
I think she'll go for a clause that says it can subsequently be extended by a joint decision to try and fudge the issue. Because a lot of the issues she is trying to fudge were heading for a blindfold Brexit, leaving without any of the key issues for the future being actually resolved, which is not very democratic for a start, for the European Parliament and the British Parliament to vote to confirm Brexit without any of the long-term issues being settled.
And one thing that she kept saying throughout the weekend was that her Brexit deal delivers. And one thing she said today in front of business leaders is that the plan that she's presenting would mean that EU nationals will not be able to jump the queue ahead of skilled workers from outside the EU. In terms of migration, is this delivering on that Brexit? You're smiling, Shana. Is this delivering on that Brexit deal promised?
Well, I mean, yes and no. I'm just so confused. This whole thing about looking for talent outside the EU, Britain does that anyway through the Commonwealth and all the rest of it. I just think it's much, just more talk, and I don't see any action happening on that, actually. And, to say that at this point where we know the British economy depends on immigrants from Europe and from outside, actually, and to make this a competition, a race between the two, I just find it appalling.
But the point was taking back control from Brussels, wasn't it? So is that what she's doing? She's taking back control.
I think that's a lot of it is about perception. I mean, she needs to say these things to be able to sell the deal, basically. I thought it was very interesting what she did last Thursday with her press conference after she got beat up in the House of Commons, basically, when she presented the deal. And she came out in the press conference and everybody was expecting resignation or some sort of announcement. And she managed to turn it around. So maybe, the longer she survives this week and the next week, there could be a deal.
All right. Well, we are now going to... Sorry, go ahead.
On the other hand, in the meantime, British public opinion has not done what everyone expected. It has not rallied behind the referendum results of 2.5 years ago. It's moved in the other direction. So if she's claiming that she's acting to implement the will of the British people without checking whether that really is still the will of the British people, then there will be many people in Britain who will be very upset about that.
But where is Labour on this, then?
Well, Labour has said it will vote against a bad deal. We think this is a bad deal. If it's rejected, and if that doesn't trigger a general election immediately, then we are open to having a referendum on the deal.
All right, we will talk more about that later on. But in the meantime, first of all, let's cross over to London, because we are joined by Peter Foster. He is the Europe editor for The Telegraph, and he is going to tell us what this means for Theresa May. Thank you for joining us there, Peter. So where are we in this process of the potential no confidence vote that Theresa May is facing? Where is that now?
Well, we're still waiting to see whether the 48 letters required to trigger this no confidence vote come forward. Clearly, on Friday, Jacob Rees-Mogg, the sort of captain of the pro-Brexit hard wing of the Tory party, came out and did a press conference, I think in the expectation that the 48 letters would arrive. And so far, no sign. And so there is a sort of sense here that maybe the steam is running out of this rebellion for now. There are parts of the pro-Brexit wing of the Tory party who think that actually they'd be better off waiting until the deal comes back from Brussels and then voting it down rather than triggering a divisive leadership election now.
Do you think she can survive this, or do you think the opposition is trying to get their ducks in a row because there's a potential that there is no other leader to take her place and therefore she can remain unchallenged for a year? So what is it? Can she survive this?
It's not even that there's no other leader to take her place because one faction or the other doesn't want to take over. It's also that the opponents of her deal don't really have a better alternative. If, say, for example, we drive the bus off the cliff and we go for a no deal, after we finish punishing each other, everyone's going to want to know, well, what deal do you want? Do you want a free trade deal? And if you want a free trade deal, they're going to ask, well, do you want a border in Northern Ireland, or do you want a border in the Irish Sea, or do you want to be in a customs union? The same choices aren't going to go away. And that's why I think actually at the end of all this, even if Parliament votes it down, The smart money says that one way or another, Theresa May will get some version of this deal through because, frankly, if you want Brexit, there isn't much of an alternative.
So you say even if Parliament votes it down, so does it matter what the numbers are right now when it comes to trying to get this through Parliament?
Well, of course it does. She'd rather get it through Parliament. She'd rather not do it without a lot of Labour votes. But if it's voted down and it goes back to Brussels, do you see a version of a deal perhaps with a more customs union in it that Labour would be able to support? At the end of the day, if the choice is between absolute chaos, between a second referendum or a move to Norway or a general election, an awful lot of MPs might find themselves under pressure to agree to the deal after the fact, perhaps with some other fig leaf concession attached to it. I don't think any of us know how this plays out until we get pretty deep into the end zone.
All right, thank you for that. Peter Foster, editor for The Telegraph, joining us there from London. Thank you very much. All right, I'll put this to you. What do you think the chances are of this getting through Parliament? And if so, is May in trouble?
I think it will be rejected by the British Parliament in the first instance. And then what happens? You've rejected the deal on the table. You don't want to leave without a deal because that's a cliff edge
As Peter was saying, there could be another version of it.
Then, logically, there's only two things you can do. Renegotiate for a different deal. Is there really a chance of that? Or you have to reconsider Brexit entirely. Legally, the British Parliament could call a halt to it. Politically, you couldn't do it without a referendum.
Shada's shaking her head.
Well, I'm just thinking, we had the impression that Britain was a sensible country and British politicians and democracy was the best. And
that
now we
disappeared
see
some months ago.
That has disappeared. Yeah. And I'm sorry to say this, we're watching Bollywood. We're watching Bollywood in Britain. And we're seeing confusion and chaos. And I have to say, I have a sneaking admiration for Theresa May. I mean, what she's been through in the last few days, in the last few years. She's negotiating with the EU because all her Brexit secretaries just sort of leave, and they seem to be incompetent anyway. They don't seem to know what they're talking about. She's negotiating within her own party, and then she's trying to sell this to the public at the same time. And she's being vilified by everyone there. So I think, this woman is showing a certain degree of tenacity. And I have to say stamina, which I find, despite
obstinacy.
You can say that. Yeah, she's very
Obstinacy.
stubborn. But my God, do you think a man would have done it? Could have lasted? Most of them would just run away, right?
That's another question. All right, she has been through a lot, as you say.
And
We watched it over the weekend. Yes,
Right?
indeed, because Theresa May's political opponents, they have been busy trying to take advantage of any political weakness that they can find, including the man everyone's been waiting to hear from, Boris Johnson. Well, let's get the latest with tonight's Brexit Brief. If you're going through hell, keep going, this former leader once said. And it's advice the incumbent appears to be heeding. Mrs. May, keeping calm and carrying on, might be grateful for her armoured plating as her enemies circle. Chief among them, Boris Johnson, who writes in The Telegraph today, describing Theresa May's deal as an appalling sellout. He brands it either a tragic illusion or an attempt at deception. And he's come up with a 6-point plan, including the scrapping of the Northern Irish backstop and the withholding of at least half of the Brexit bill until a deal is reached with Brussels. Those who question whether Brexit is worth the fuss have a different plan, what they call a people's vote on the deal. But don't expect that anytime soon. Opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn, whose support would be needed for it to go ahead, sounding distinctly cool on the idea.
I think it's an option for the future, but it's not an option for today, because if we put a referendum tomorrow, what's it going to be on?
And Dominic Raab, the man who was at the heart of Brexit talks last week, now chauffeurless, is trying his hand at a bit of backseat driving.
I do think we're being bullied. I do think we are being subject to what is pretty close to blackmail, frankly, for your viewers at home. And I do think there is a point at which it probably should have been done before, where we just say, I'm sorry, this is the United Kingdom of Great Britain, Northern Ireland. We cannot accept those dictated terms.
All right, in terms of scenarios, is a crash out still possible? Okay, let's start with you from here before we go back to the UK.
Yes, in Brussels there's no appetite for renegotiation, so it's basically this deal or nothing.
But there are concerns still from the different countries, right? It's not like they all just embrace this deal that's on the table.
Yes, there are concerns from Spain on Gibraltar and other member states on the level playing field, not giving the UK an advantage. But I think everybody understands the weight of this and would be ready to to
suppress their concerns,
to suppress their
so to speak?
concerns, exactly, to get a deal. So I think on the EU side there is this room of maneuver that we withhold our reservations if we can make sure that we can get a deal. And I think it's very interesting to hear Mr. Raab's comments on the deal. I mean, this has been a 20 or a 17-month negotiation, like over a year, and he's been a negotiator. He's been in the room. So if he couldn't turn this around, I think it's really unfair to.
If there is no appetite in the EU, is there appetite in seeing what we just saw? You know, it's them still trying to reopen negotiations. Is there an appetite for another scenario where there could possibly be no deal, a crash-out scenario?
Only a few people on the extreme Eurosceptic right wing of the Conservative Party envisage crashing out without a deal, because that scenario leaves legal limbo on everything from trade to aircraft landing rights to citizens' rights. It's bad for everybody. So if the deal is rejected, you're forced, unless you can renegotiate, onto the scenario of do we go ahead with Brexit or do we reconsider it? That's why so many people are now advocating another referendum in Britain, and don't rule out that possibility.
What is the likelihood of that?
A year ago, I would have said very small, but it's now significant. I think the bookkeepers, where people bet, are now betting on a 40% likelihood of that happening, and it seems to be going up every day.
Do you think that the sentiment has indeed changed?
I do think so. I think given the confusion and the mendacity of the Tory party at the moment, the bitter infighting, the civil war, I think people are getting fed up. And people want certainty. I mean, business this morning, I think, told Theresa May, they need a certain environment. They need predictability to make their business investment decisions. People need to know whether their children can stay in university, whether they should be buying property, whether they'll have health services. So I think that people are getting fed up. I mean, definitely, you see now the kind of language being used seriously in a democracy, talking about bullying from Brussels. What are we talking about?
I mean, this has
complete
really
and utter
been
rubbish, really.
Indeed, this has really been a divisive topic and continues to be so. All right, let's move to a slightly different topic, but still related to Brexit, because there have been some emails obtained by British academics that show that Donald Trump's former campaign manager, Steve Bannon, and Cambridge Analytica, that they were in contact with the Leave EU campaign. Alex Morgan and our team in the Cube were looking into this part of the story. Alex.
Tessa, hello to Tessa and the panel, of course. Now, look at this. This is a tweet from Leave.eu calling for Theresa May to go this week. May must go. They want a no-confidence vote in the Prime Minister. Leave.eu, all the way from the very beginning, has campaigned for a hard Brexit, for the UK to make a very clean, clear cut from the European Union. Let me just make one point of clarification here, if I might, about what we're talking about when we talk about Brexit campaigns. There was the official Vote Leave campaign. Now that, of course, has questions raised about its activities as well, but we are talking about Leave.eu. That was the unofficial Brexit campaign, bankrolled and funded and, in fact, led in many ways by Aaron Banks. He is a businessman who has been a prominent critic of the European Union. Now, these emails that have been released, obtained by whistleblowers from within Cambridge Analytica, that data firm, show, at least in the recipients of the emails, a connection between Mr. Banks, as I say, bankroller of Leave.eu, of course, Cambridge Analytica, that data firm, and Steve Bannon, who is copied in on these emails. There seems to have been an attempt by Mr. Banks to get Steve Bannon involved. Why is it controversial? Well, this is in 2016. Donald Trump is not yet in the White House, but Cambridge Analytica and Steve Bannon, of course, played a key role. Well, Steve Bannon certainly did. And Cambridge Analytica harvested the data of tens of millions of Americans from their social media accounts to psychologically profile adverts. These are controversial figures, Cambridge Analytica particularly. Well, these emails from early in 2016 show Aaron Banks in contact with Cambridge Analytica. But look, it's not all this simple, Tessa. Let me just clarify. It's not clear whether Mr. Banks, in his emails, is talking about the activities of his insurance company or the wider Brexit campaign. Either way, though, we do see meetings having gone on and direct connections being formed. All of this has got a lot of people reacting, talking about what the implications mean. Let me just bring up a tweet from which quotes Damien Collins. He is an MP in the UK leading a parliamentary investigation into fake news and particularly looking at the Brexit campaign. He says, there are direct links between the political movements behind Brexit and Trump. We've got to recognise the bigger picture here. He's also saying this raises questions. If Mr. Banks is in contact with Cambridge Analytica in early 2016, Why was he doing that? Where was the money coming from? It's really raising questions about who exactly was funding what and what these relationships between Cambridge Analytica and Aaron Banks and Leave.eu looks like. Let me just bring up one thing from Aaron Banks, who is quite a prominent tweeter, but he's here talking about people suggesting he was backed by Russia and there was a Russian foreign involvement in his Brexit campaign. Well, he tweeted to say last week, "I don't doubt Russia have attempted to interfere or been active across the world, but sorry, conspiracy theorists, they didn't do it via me." So, of course, denials from Aaron Banks and Leave.eu. But the release of these emails has got a lot of people questioning, why was Aaron Banks in contact with Cambridge Analytica? What exactly did that relationship look like? And Steve Bannon copied in on those emails. What exactly was that relationship like? So a lot of questions, Tessa, and people calling for the investigation into all this to keep on going and, in fact, if anything, to get more specific.
All right, thank you for that, Alex, and our team in the Cube in Lyon. I mean, broadening that topic of latching onto a very divisive topic. I mean, what are the implications of something like this? Is there influence, or is a certain opinion being taken and just capitalized on? Is that what we're seeing?
Well, you rightly linked it to the British referendum, which these people were involved with, and we already knew the referendum was won by a narrow majority.
Because that is not to dismiss existing opinions, obviously, of people who voted Brexit.
No, but when you know that this referendum was swung by a narrow majority on the basis of a pack of lies, by the way, when you now know on top of that that there was misspending, they exceeded their spending limits, and now all this stuff about misuse of data, that is causing many people in Britain to question the legitimacy, if you like, of that referendum result. But legally, of course, it was only an advisory referendum. The political consequences were decisions of the British Parliament.
All right. Do you have any? Okay, Esther, you want to
me,
say
it's fascinating that this doesn't dominate the UK politics more, because I mean, this calls into question the entire system and then the entire referendum, how it was decided. And it's not a question about whether to build an airport or whatever. This will influence the next decades of this country. So this should be looked at into by all politicians and parties in the country.
And absolutely, as we get into more and more elections and now technology playing such an integral role in that. All right, now it's time to move on to today's You Said It. It comes from Donald Trump. He appears to have captured the imagination of the Finnish people. Let's take a look. As wildfires ravish California, helicopters have proven to be the most effective way to fight the flames. But while visiting the state, U.S. President Trump reckoned prevention is the key, and his proposal came straight from Europe.
Got to take care of the floors, the floors of the forests, very important. You look at other countries where they do it differently, and it's a whole different story. I was with the president of Finland, and he said, we have much different. We're a forest nation. He called it a forest nation. And they spend a lot of time on raking and cleaning and doing things, and they don't have any problem. And when it is, it's a very small problem. So I know everybody's looking at that, to that end, and it's going to work out. It's going to work out well.
But the Finnish president doesn't quite remember it that way. Sauli Niinisto, seen here with Donald Trump in July, says he talked about Finland's high-tech monitoring system and network, but doesn't recall discussing raking leaves with the leader of the free world. All this caught the attention of the people of Finland. Using the hashtag #RakeNews, Finns spent the weekend trolling President Trump by posting pictures of themselves raking and even vacuuming the country's vast forests. But who can blame Donald Trump for simply wanting to rake America great again?
That's happening as we speak.
You can rely on Donald Trump to always say something, huh? The Finnish people learn something new about themselves.
He has a thing for Scandinavian countries. I mean, he had that tweet on Sweden, what happened last night in Sweden, and then people in Sweden reacted with tweets. Same thing's happening in Finland now.
I know, I can always rely on him.
Yeah, but there's a problem there as well. It is funny, absolutely, but it's also a distraction. And it's noisy. So much important stuff is happening out there, really, huh? And we get distracted by things like this, and he does it deliberately. I mean, it's all planned, it's all deliberate, and we do fall into the trap. I find it funny too, but, it is a distraction.
It's a Donald Trump playbook. It is his playbook. All right, A lot more coming up on Raw Politics for you. Welcome to the Spy School. We'll tell you about a new proposal from EU defense ministers. Plus, not backing down, the French President Emmanuel Macron's response to a huge protest this weekend over rising fuel taxes. Don't go away. Welcome back to Raw Politics. Now, a royal welcome for Emmanuel Macron today. The French president and his wife touched down in Brussels this morning to begin a two-day official state visit. The couple was greeted by the King and Queen of Belgium and also met with Belgian Prime Minister Charles Michel. But while the French leader sits down to a Belgian banquet, back at home, the so-called Yellow Vest protests continue. Demonstrators are angry about rising fuel taxes, and one woman was hit by a car and killed this weekend after a driver panicked after being stopped by protesters. More than 400 people were injured. The protests are the latest domestic blow to a president whose popularity has slumped and a further 4 points this month. Well, joining me now to dig a little deeper on all things Macron is Pauline Bock, a French journalist and contributor to The New Statesman and other publications. And back with me is Esther Zalan, a reporter with The Observer, and Shada Islam, director of Europe and Geopolitics at Friends of Europe. All right, Pauline, we've seen this before with Emmanuel Macron. Him being on the world stage here, parading with, the King and Queen of Belgium, while that is happening at home. Is this deliberate?
Is it deliberate? I think he's just following his course. He thinks that if he does not really acknowledge what's happening, or if he doesn't make a big deal out of it, then it will eventually go away, or at least he will be able to control what's happening. He's been said to be very tired at the moment, so it may also be a way of not saying something that's wrong. But I don't think it's going to work. I think this especially is a big movement that came out of nowhere and that no one really controls. It's not really, it's being backed by the FN, the far right, but it's not coming from the far right. No one really understands who are these people. They're from different places. They're from all over France, and they're just very angry. That's not going to go away.
So is he ignoring it? And this could backfire on him if he doesn't pay enough attention to what's happening back home.
Yes, it could backfire. I think what he's also trying to do is to hammer home this idea that he's the one who beat Marine Le Pen. So on the European level, he's trying to position himself as the opposition to the Salvinis, to the Orbans, and sort of keep reminding people back home that this is what I'm standing for. This is what separates us. I'm the one who separates us from Marine Le Pen becoming president, but it doesn't seem to work that well.
It doesn't work anymore at all. I think people at this point are more angry at him than they are at Le Pen.
So Shada, how big of a gamble is this for Emmanuel Macron, trying to position himself in such a way in the grander scheme of things in Europe as the the far right movement? Could this just feed into the hands of people who say, well, look at what they're doing to Europe and to your livelihoods and to your lives?
It could, but I think also Europe needs a man like Macron at the moment. Every single politician has two personas. Back home, where you have to deal with the nuts and bolts, the nitty-gritty of what reform is, and reform and change is not easy. I mean, he is right when he says you need to raise taxes to pay for renewable energy. I mean, that's an argument for climate change, people who are pushing for, stronger policies on renewables. That should make a difference. But the reality is that people's, income is affected. So you have to deal with that. There are two personas, the European politician, the international politician who shines on the global stage, and then back home you have to deal with the reality of what governing is all about. And politicians, Merkel has the same problem, have to deal with that, have to juggle these two priorities, these two concerns.
Well, and speaking of what Macron has to deal at home, more than 250,000 people have turned out to join the protest from the very north of the country all the way down to Marseille. They're all saying the same thing, that they have had enough. Take a listen.
Ils ne nous écoutent pas, donc on voudrait faire passer le message qu'ils baissent toutes les taxes, que nous, le petit ouvrier, on ne peut plus vivre.
Là, aujourd'hui, je me mobilise avec tous les citoyens parce que je m'inquiète pour mon futur. Moi, je suis en terminale. Avec moi, je travaille en dehors du lycée. Mon salaire de lycéen ne me permet même pas de pouvoir rien que payer l'assurance de la voiture, par exemple. C'est beaucoup trop et c'est plus possible.
avec toutes les taxes, tout ce qu'il fait Macron, tout ce qu'il a mis et tout ce qui va augmenter sans arrêt et qui augmente, le pouvoir d'achat des gens a tellement baissé, nous les retraités, mais plus pour les jeunes, parce que on va les rouges comme ça, sans arrêt.
Et qu'on voit finalement l'ISF, il est supprimé, alors que pour les jeunes, les APL, on va enlever 5 €. Donc on a du mal un peu à comprendre le message qui est envoyé. Donc on s'est dit, si on ne se réveille pas maintenant, on ne le fera jamais, quoi.
I mean, it's become more than just about fuel taxes. It's about, cost of living and survival for the French people. His popularity rating is down to 25% from 29%. How can Macron weather this?
I think he'd have to listen to actually, that's what they say, to first acknowledge their anger, and he's tried to do that. But his Prime Minister Edouard Philippe has said, "I hear you, but we're not going to change course," and so that won't work because they still feel like they're not being listened to, and unless he does something. Even if it's not to actually
But then what you're saying is
taxes,
listening to them would mean not going through with the reforms that Shada says is needed.
Not necessarily, but for what the young man was saying about cutting the tax for the rich, the ESF, I think that was a big mistake for Macron because that's one of the first things he did, and it really sent a message that he was what he's been called the president of the rich. And he's not really done anything to balance that for the poorer people, or at least people who are struggling a bit, like all these people were saying. He needs to send some kind of message to them that even if he has to do this reform, and he can do that, he can tell them, we need to do this, but look, I've heard what you were saying, I've heard your anger, and I'm going to try and do something else to,
And we've seen in the past, fuel prices, protests that began with fuel price increases have become bigger for governments. Is this still a far-off scenario for Emmanuel Macron or a possibility?
Well, that definitely needs to make gestures, that's for sure. And I'm sure that it didn't help all these scandals in which he seemed very aloof and very detached from the population, with the bodyguard and all the other scandals, which were not big, but just reinforces that image that he's president for some other group of people, for the rich, and not for the everyday French citizen.
Well, certainly
it adds up. It adds up to it's one declaration after another that is just always either making fun or trying to make a joke that backfires, and it's always about the people that he doesn't really talk to or know.
We will be seeing a lot more of Emmanuel Macron as the European elections draws closer. All right, let's now move on to today's Power Play, which today is actually top secret. Let's take a look. From Brussels with love, EU defence ministers are congregating in the Belgian capital today, and they're reportedly plotting the creation of a joint EU spy school. The UK, with its own world-leading intelligence services, has long opposed an EU intelligence alliance. But as Dr. No Deal stumbles towards the exit, Brussels is perhaps eyeing an opportunity to live and let live. So that was a Politico report there about the spy school. Shada, do you think, what was the point being made by defense ministers when they talk about this?
I always look at this as ABC. So A, response to America first, or we're turning inwards, we're not going to be there, loyal partners for Europe, so Europe has to take care of its own destiny, its own future. B, for Brexit. Britain out, we can move ahead with certain, things that they were blocking before, and C for China, rising China. And you could put Russia there too, So the message, I think it's an interesting message. How far we can go, how quickly we can go that far, I don't know. But it's interesting messages coming out from the European Union, European Army, the spy school, PESCO, all of these signs of maturity, a kind of defense awakening, security awakening in Europe.
But can it really be done?
I would be interested in the details because there have been concerns raised within the NATO about some allies, which are EU members as well, that they might be passing on some secrets to Russia or to other countries. So the devil is in the details, as always.
We will be looking at those details indeed. All right, we have a lot more coming up for you on Raw Politics after the break. A Dutch Christmas tradition fuels a polarized debate about racism. That's coming up. Welcome back to Raw Politics. Now, Dutch pre-Christmas festivities descended into violent scuffles and arrests this weekend. The controversy centers on a Christmas character called Black Pete. The Dutch and Belgian tradition involves white people putting on black face paint and frizzy wigs. Opponents say it is racist, but a majority of Dutch people see it as harmless fun. Now, this year's celebrations came days after a court rejected an attempt by anti-racism groups to ban Black Pete from state television. Right, with me now to discuss this controversial Christmas tradition, we have Mark Demismaker, a Belgian MEP with the ECR Group, Shada Islam, the Director of Europe and Geopolitics at Friends of Europe, and Sarah Chander, who's an advocacy officer at the European Network Against Racism. All right, well, I'll start with you. You're Belgian. Is this tradition or is it racist?
Oh, it's tradition. There's no intention whatsoever of racism here. I grew up with it as a child, with this tradition. It has nothing to do with Christmas, really. It's St. Nicholas. It's his birthday on the 6th of December. And it's a tradition that the holy man, he's a good man, he brings toys. He's accompanied by Black Pete. And we were told as a child that that's because he comes through the chimney, and the chimney is dirty, it's black, and so his face is black as well. So it's a bit the story of the bad cop, the good cop. Yeah? St. Nicholas, who is the good holy man, and Black Pete,
But why is it that image that is being represented as good cop, bad cops, as you said? So who's the good cop, who's the bad cop? Why does it have to be that image? Why does it have to be someone, a person with a black face?
It has nothing to do with color, I think. You know, this St. Nicholas, he's the good holy man who, well, children, when they believe in him, they think he's a real century-old good man. When he comes at home or in public, of course, somebody dresses up and he is unrecognizable. And it's a practical reason as well. You know, he shouldn't be recognized as one of your friends or your neighbors, so they paint him black, and he's the one who can punish punish the children who were not good.
This perspective, you're Belgian, and actually majority of Dutch people actually also say this is tradition, but you don't agree with this. That is it racist?
I wouldn't argue with the comment that it's tradition. I think we have many traditions. However, some of them are racist and they have racist connotations.
That's something different.
The image of Black Pete has actually not been that long a tradition. It came around in the 19th century. As you said, it's not just about the blackness of the suit, but there is a curly wig, there is a stereotypical features associated with black people. So there's a use of a big gold earring and big giant lips, which is internationally recognized as a negative stereotype for black people or people of African descent. In terms of whether it's racist or not, we have to also look beyond the intentions of it. Racism isn't just an intentional phenomenon, it's also about the effect. There have been numerous studies in Belgium, academic studies, and also in the Netherlands by the Dutch Ombudsman for Children that have outlined that the prominence of this figure has not only led to negative stereotypes and potential increase in violence against black people, but also negative impacts on children in terms of increased bullying and an increased feelings of a lack of self-esteem. So I think we also have to look beyond what are the intentions of the people using Black Pete, which is also to say often it's for the children, but generally it's perpetuated by adults. Mm-hmm. And we are not looking at the effects of this on black people, people of African descent, who have campaigned for many years now, more than 10 years, more than 20 years in the Netherlands against this stereotype.
Shada, before I go back to you, Shada, is it possible that culturally the meaning given by Belgian people, the Dutch people, to that, or the affinity they have, it's not the same here in Belgium and in the Netherlands as it is in America, where it's very, very sensitive that you just don't do this? Is there an argument to be made in that sense, where the way one relates to what that image represents is different here?
It may be different here, but times are changing here as well. So I don't buy this contextual difference. I think we live in a multicultural society, and as Sarah has said, we have people of all different faiths, different colors living with us. What was not considered racist maybe 20, 25 years ago is now. People are sensitive to this. They feel it. Children feel it. I mean, I have a lot of black friends whose children really do feel it in school when, they turn to and say, well, you'll be Black Pete, you don't even need makeup. It's denigrating. And I think societies in transition have to accept a certain give and take, a certain degree of compromise. You cannot go on the way things were before just because it's tradition. There's some very nasty traditions out there. I'm not going to name them here now, but there are, and we are getting rid of them slowly but surely. And this is one that we have to do in a multicultural Europe.
I agree. Society can change and can evolve, of course. What I don't agree with is the violence with which people who don't agree with it have taken to the streets now. This is supposed to be a festival for children. I see crying children being confronted with violent
but the violence
mobs.
is coming from both sides.
From both sides, and that's not okay.
Yeah,
of course, we can. There's a difference in. Well, there is no racist intention here. I was a child. I grew up with this.
You're a white child.
We were told, he's black
child.
because he comes through the chimney. That's
and then
what
the lips
we believe.
swell up.
But of course, that's not how other people might see it. That's something different. And then I agree we should make kind of a compromise.
So do you think the Belgians and the Dutch should acknowledge that society is changing, the diversity is changing, and
we have to respect our traditions, and also people who are new in our society have to learn about our traditions, have to be explained about our traditions, and have to respect our traditions. And we have to make compromise as well. For me, it's not necessary that we depict him like, with curly hair and with big lips and with his earrings. We can just show him with black swipes on his face, and that would be a completely different presentation, I think. That's how we do it. Like past weekend, St. Nicholas and his Pete's arrived in Antwerp, and that's how we did it there.
So do we get rid of it or do we evolve it, where it becomes inoffensive?
I think there is first of all, I would like to talk about what you do when your people have issues with this phenomenon. We have to allow for the right for peaceful protest against Zwarte Piet, which we have not had in Belgium and in the Netherlands, where in some cases there have been far-right manifestations against peaceful anti-Zwarte Piet protesters. And we've had a failure of the authorities to protect those people who are peacefully protesting. And so this has not been protected. Then we also have to listen to the groups affected by this, the groups that are shown to be negatively affected by these racist stereotypes, and we have to ask them, what would you think that is a good solution to this? There is an organization in the Netherlands called Kick Out Zwarte Piet, and they're advocating for an inclusive Sinterklaas celebration. So it's not a threat to the tradition. They recognize that many children benefit from this tradition. It is a tradition in many Flemish parts of the Belgium and the Netherlands, and they advocate, why does he have to be black? Why do we have to perpetuate this connotation that white is good and black
we have
is bad?
5 seconds, if you can just say your point in 5 seconds.
You can organize a debate about it, but I don't agree that someone disturbs what has to be a festival for children. This is the most exciting moment for the children in a year. And you should not disturb it.
It is interesting that the main defenders of this are adults and not children.
All right,
That's a very good point.
This is definitely a very interesting debate, sensitive debate that we're having now, especially since Christmas is around the corner. All right, after the break on Raw Politics, the Franco-German call for a Eurozone budget. Don't go away. Welcome back to Raw Politics. The future of Europe's public purse is on the agenda in Brussels today. Finance ministers are meeting to discuss a Franco-German blueprint for a Eurozone budget. And as part of his European charm offensive, President Emmanuel Macron has been pushing for an independent fund he hopes will stabilize and complete Europe's monetary union. Well, the idea is that Eurozone members would all contribute financially, including through new tax regimes. The money could then be used to stimulate investment during times of economic crisis. All right, joining us for this panel to find out whether this budget is a fudge or it's a step towards a stronger monetary union, we have Bernd Lucke. He's a German MEP with the ECR group. And Pauline Bock is back with us, a contributor with The New Statesman. And Mark Demesmaeker, a Belgian MEP, also with the ECR group. All right, first of all, let's talk about the fact that Emmanuel Macron is pushing forward. You have the EU army, and now you have this budget. What is the goal here?
Well, the goal is to further and strengthen European integration. And I'm very critical about this type of goal because very clearly we have not mastered the problems which the European Union is confronted with. So we still haven't found any solution to the refugee crisis. We haven't found any solution to the Eurozone crisis.
This is coming from a German, clearly.
Well, I mean, the German government has indeed lined up with Emmanuel Macron on suggesting this type of measures like the Eurozone budget. But this is sort of only trying to treat the symptoms, and it is not going down to the roots of the crisis. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, is the wrong way to tackle problems.
Do we need another budget, another bureaucratic mechanism?
Absolutely not. No, I agree. It all boils down to the question, how do we solve our problems? By implementing the necessary reforms, or by just asking more money, because that's what it's all about. Now, I am Flemish, I'm Belgian, and I know everything about being member of a transfer union. Belgium is a transfer union. And I don't want the Eurozone to become a Belgium extra large, because that's what will be. You will create kind of transfer union, which is counterproductive, I think, which is not sustainable, I think, and which will make nobody happy. Those who will contribute will not be happy. Those who will receive will not be happy because there will be some conditionality involved.
But status quo can't stay anymore in the EU, as we have seen, right? Either countries get closer or they don't. I mean, this is you can't stay in the same place. I mean, is this needed?
In this case, countries don't really get closer because we have the European Union, of which the Eurozone is just a part. Now, if we create a budget just for a subset...
It's for the currency.
Well, no, wait a minute. It is for organizing transfers from some countries to other countries. Yes. But those countries which are actually the weakest in the European Union are typically not part of the Eurozone. So by spending extra money on the Eurozone countries, we actually increase the disparity between countries in the European Union. This is exactly the opposite of cohesion policy, which the European Union should actually execute. And ironically, the Eurozone tries now, or the German Franco-German proposal cites cohesion policy as the legal base for this Eurozone budget. It is exactly the opposite of that.
All right, Pauline, very quickly, does Macron have a point?
Macron wants more unity, as you said, and that's one way he can agree on with Merkel, which that's a big deal for his big European project. I agree, though, that it's not necessarily the best way of doing it. More tax is not going to make anyone happy, and the people who receive the money, as you were saying, probably aren't going to be as equal as they should be.
But we will be hearing a lot more about that the Eurozone budget, and the devil is in the details, as always. All right, it's now time for today's Raw Moment, and it's a colorful one. Let's take a look. When world leaders gather for summits, it's usually a dull affair. But it's a whole different story at APEC, the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit. There were no dark suits and dull skirts to be seen as some of the most powerful people in the world convened in Papua New Guinea and took part in the traditional silly shirts photo opportunity. And it's not just this year. Each summit, leaders are forced to embrace an awkward family photo in eye-catching dress. Here are some of our favorites from recent years. There have been attempts to get rid of this tradition. Should they be kept? What do you think, Mark?
Well, I love it. Yeah, well, it's an informal way of showing that this conference took place, because maybe otherwise nobody would know about it. Now everybody knows about it.
Now they call it silly shirt. Would you wear a shirt like that?
Well, I would, of course. I mean, I think it's actually a good idea, because all those suits are just getting boring. So why should we not sort of revive traditional ways of clothing? It's fine with me.
Yes. Great photos, like it too? Great PR. It's amazing. Indeed. I do miss Obama, though.
Yeah, great PR indeed. All right, thank you so much for joining us in tonight's World Politics. Do join us again tomorrow. See you then.